Before the sun reaches Giza, the pyramid is already there, a darker geometry against a sky beginning to pale above the Nile Valley. It is unfinished, its upper courses still absent, its sloping faces broken by working surfaces and the uneven traces of construction. Yet even in this incomplete state it seems too large to belong to ordinary human life. Below it, lamps burn in low rooms, embers brighten beneath bread moulds. Donkeys shift in enclosed yards. Ropes lie coiled beside wooden sledges, and somewhere in the darkness a stoneworker tests the edge of a copper tool against his thumb. The plateau has not awakened all at once. It stirs through hundreds of small movements, a jar lifted, a doorway opened, grain poured onto a grinding stone, sandals tightened around dusty feet. Long before the first block moves, the day has begun in kitchens, storerooms, offices, sleeping quarters, workshops, and along the waterways that connect this royal building ground to the living river. The air is cool enough for the moment, though everyone knows what will become. Within hours, the limestone will throw sunlight back into their faces, dust will cling to sweat, and every exposed surface will seem to hold the heat. For now, men emerge beneath a fading field of stars and eat what can be eaten quickly. Bread is dense, coarse, and dependable. Beer is nourishment as much as drink, cloudy with grain and safer in character than the intoxicating image the modern word may suggest. Some receive onions, fish, or other additions according to supply, position, and circumstance. Meat exists within the organized provisioning system that supports the royal works, but it would be careless to imagine every laborer eating it at every meal. The evidence suggests differences between groups, accommodations, and status. Hunger here is not necessarily starvation. It is the emptiness felt before a ration arrives, the appetite created by heavy work, and the quiet knowledge that a person's strength depends upon stores counted by someone else. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, then remain for a little while in this uncertain hour before sunrise, because the human scale of Giza is clearest when the monument is still only a silhouette. Archaeology gives no complete timetable for one particular morning during Khufu's reign. No surviving document follows an anonymous worker from his sleeping mat to the pyramid and back again. The best-known settlement south of the Great Monuments, now called Hayt el Ghurab, preserves streets, galleries, bakeries, workshops, administrative spaces, and remains of large-scale food preparation, but its most securely understood phases belong mainly to the later pyramid projects of Khafra and Menkaure. Earlier occupation may reach into the age of Khufu. What survives in the record suggests continuity in the broader systems of labour and supply, but every intimate scene must be reconstructed with care. The morning taking shape here is therefore not a recovered diary. It is a historically grounded possibility assembled from papyri ceilings, tools, bones, plant remains, architecture, and the marks left directly on stone. In a bakery, the heat has begun before the desert has. Grain must be ground, dough mixed, vessels arranged, fuel managed, ash cleared, and production repeated on a scale far beyond one household. The work is exhausting in its own right. Bodies bend near grinding stones, flour drifts into the air, smoke finds eyes and throats. Ceramic bread moulds retain the fierce heat of the ovens. Nearby, brewing and storage turn grain into another form of ration, while scribes or supervisors account for what enters and leaves. Thousands of clay ceiling fragments found at Giza preserve impressions made by an administration that touched daily life through doors, containers, deliveries, and controlled spaces. They are small enough to disappear in the palm, yet they hint at a world of authorization. A storeroom is not merely opened, goods are not simply taken. Someone bears responsibility, someone records, someone seals, and someone later breaks that seal. The pyramid rises through stone, but it also rises through counting. Elsewhere, crews gather around equipment that appears almost modest beside the monument. Wooden levers, ropes, stone pounders, copper blades, baskets, mallets, and sledges do not resemble the machinery that modern eyes instinctively expect. Their very simplicity has helped create centuries of disbelief, as though ordinary tools cannot produce extraordinary results. Yet no tool works alone. Its real force lies in prepared surfaces, practiced hands, repeated motion, measured timing, maintenance, and the coordination of many people. A rope must be inspected before it carries strain. Copper edges must be sharpened because limestone dulls them. Water has to be brought where it is needed, whether for drinking, mixing materials, controlling friction, or other work whose precise details scholars still debate. The first task of the morning is not always to haul. It may be to repair what yesterday nearly destroyed. Down toward the harbour zone, another rhythm begins. The Giza of Khufu is not the isolated desert scene familiar from modern photographs. The Nile landscape approaches the plateau through channels, basins, floodplain, and managed access to water. Boats carry people, food, timber, tools, and stone. White casing limestone arrives from Tura across the river, its journey organised through teams such as the one supervised by Mera, whose daily record survived by chance far away at Wadi el Jarf. His papyrus does not explain how blocks are raised onto the pyramid, but it reveals something just as important: work measured in days, journeys, stops, deliveries, and named responsibilities. Somewhere in the dimness, boat crews are already handling lines and poles. Mud grips their feet near the landing places. The smell of water, fish, livestock, smoke, and wet earth rises below a monument now surrounded in the modern imagination by sand. The people gathering beneath the pyramid are not one undifferentiated mass, and the familiar picture of endless enslaved bodies driven under whips does not fit the evidence. Egypt certainly knows forms of bondage and dependence, but the categories of freedom, obligation, service, and servitude in the Old Kingdom do not map neatly onto modern language. At Giza there are skilled specialists, permanent personnel, administrators, boatmen, quarry workers, artisans, food producers, and probably rotating labour groups mobilised through the state. Some may understand their service as duty to the king, the gods, their community, or an order they have little power to refuse. Those possibilities can coexist. A person can be provisioned and still constrained, respected for skill and still exhausted, part of a celebrated project and still desperate for the day to end. A faint line of gold now appears in the east. Faces become visible. The unfinished pyramid changes from black to grey, and then its edges begin to catch the first direct light. Calls pass between groups, not yet the roar that will fill the plateau later, but the controlled noise of preparation becoming action. Bread is wrapped or carried. Jars move out from storage. A scribe settles into position with the tools of record-keeping. A foreman looks toward the crews, while quarrymen descend toward exposed rock, and haulers gather beside a waiting sledge. No single surviving source tells us precisely how this dawn unfolded, and no single reconstruction fully accounts for every person who worked here. but the scattered evidence agrees on one essential truth: the pyramid does not rise in silence, and it does not rise by magic. It rises within a populated, supplied, regulated landscape, through mornings like this one, repeated across years, as the sun clears the horizon. The monument begins to shine, and beneath it the machinery of Khufu's Egypt takes human form. As the plateau takes human form beneath the rising sun, the deeper machinery behind it remains mostly invisible. The stone is obvious. The kingdom that moves the stone is not. Every loaf distributed at Giza begins with fields far beyond the pyramid's shadow. Every copper tool depends upon miners, smelters, transport crews, workshops, and officials. Every rope requires fibre, skill, and time. Even the simplest water jar represents clay dug from the river environment, shaped by practiced hands, fired with collected fuel, carried to a storehouse, and assigned to someone's use. The construction ground is therefore only the final meeting point of an enormous chain. To understand why thousands of people can work here for years, it is necessary to look outward from Giza, across the narrow green corridor of Egypt, where the Nile turns sunlight, mud, and organized labor into political power. Khufu rules during the 4th dynasty, in the period now called the Old Kingdom, more than 4.5 millennia ago. Egypt is already ancient by the time his pyramid begins to rise. Kings have governed a unified state for centuries: writing, taxation, long-distance trade, monumental architecture, formal religious institutions, specialized craftsmanship, and royal administration are well established. Khufu does not invent the pyramid from nothing. His father, Sneferu, presides over an extraordinary era of experimentation, during which royal builders confront the practical problems of turning the stepped form into a true smooth-sided pyramid. At Meidum and Dashur, designs change, angles shift. Internal spaces are reconsidered, and lessons accumulate in stone. Khufu inherits more than a throne. He inherits experienced workforces, administrative habits, quarry knowledge, transport systems, and a royal ambition already tested on a vast scale. The center of power lies near Memphis, strategically placed close to the meeting of Upper and Lower Egypt. Yet the kingdom is not a modern nation filled with identical offices and uniform procedures. Authority moves through households, estates, temples, local officials, royal dependents, elite networks, and institutions whose precise relationships are sometimes difficult to recover. Titles preserved in tombs reveal administrators responsible for granaries, treasuries, storehouses, work crews, documents, livestock, and royal projects. Some titles sound exact while concealing duties scholars still debate. An official may combine religious, economic, and political responsibilities because these categories are not cleanly separated. A priest can also be an administrator. A high-ranking family member can supervise work. A scribe does not merely write. He helps transform material reality into quantities that the state can demand, store, redistribute, and verify. At the base of this system is the Nile. Each year, its inundation spreads water and silt across the floodplain. Though the height and timing of the flood vary, sometimes with dangerous consequences, Egyptian life follows a seasonal rhythm often described through inundation, emergence, and harvest. Fields disappear beneath water, reappear as the river withdraws, and then produce grain under intense cultivation. Emmer wheat and barley become food, drink, tax, ration, reserve, and political assurance. There is no coinage circulating through Khufu's Egypt in the modern sense. Wealth and payment can take the form of grain, cloth, livestock, oil, beer, bread, and access to institutional support. A worker's ration is therefore more than lunch. It is part of an economy in which the state gathers agricultural produce and returns portions of it through service, office, and dependency. It is tempting to picture the annual flood creating a convenient season when idle farmers are simply sent to build the pyramid. That familiar explanation may contain part of the truth, but it is too neat. Agricultural schedules differ across regions. Construction continues through complex cycles, and skilled tasks require experienced personnel rather than temporary hands alone. Rotating labour obligations may have helped supply large numbers of workers, especially when fields were inaccessible, but full-time specialists, permanent crews, transport teams, administrators, and support staff are also essential. No single seasonal formula fully accounts for the evidence. The pyramid requires continuity, tools repaired, food delivered, boats scheduled, stone cut, surfaces surveyed, and records maintained regardless of whether a particular village delegation has completed its period of service. Royal authority makes such coordination possible, but authority alone cannot explain why the project matters. Khufu is not regarded merely as a wealthy man commissioning an enormous private tomb. Egyptian kingship binds the ruler to cosmic order, divine power, territorial unity, ritual responsibility, and the continued stability of the land. The king stands at the center of a sacred political system in which maintaining order against chaos is not an abstract philosophical concern. It is expressed through temples, offerings, festivals, justice, agricultural abundance, military security, and monuments designed to endure beyond a single lifetime. The pyramid complex belongs to this religious landscape. Its name, Akhet Khufu, usually rendered as the horizon of Khufu, associates the king with transformation, the sky, and an eternal cycle larger than ordinary death. That sacred meaning does not make the labour effortless or universally welcomed. Ideology can inspire, compel, justify, and conceal inequality at the same time. A village required to provide personnel may experience royal service differently from an official rewarded with status. A skilled mason may take pride in accuracy while resenting an overseer. A boat crew may understand its work as honourable and still fear a delayed ration. Human motives do not become simple merely because the state speaks in the language of divine order. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for the thoughts of people who left no inscriptions of their own. Elite tombs preserve titles and achievements. Humble frustrations rarely survive in such durable form. Archaeology must therefore read the kingdom indirectly, through worn bones, discarded tools, food remains, living quarters, broken seals, and marks made by hands that never expected to be remembered. The scale of royal control is impressive, but it should not be mistaken for limitless power. Egypt's administration depends upon information moving slowly along the river and through chains of command. Boats are delayed, floods disappoint, grain spoils, tools break, officials compete, misunderstand orders, or protect their own interests. A centralized state is still made of fallible people. The genius of the system lies not in perfect control, but in its ability to absorb countless imperfections and continue. Granaries create reserves, scribes create accountability, crew organization divides an impossible task into repeated obligations. Waterways reduce the cost of moving weight. Standard measures allow stone, grain, and time to be compared across distances. What appears from afar as the will of one pharaoh is, at ground level, a network of negotiations between landscape, bureaucracy, belief, and bodily endurance. Beyond the plateau, fields brighten under the same sun now striking the pyramid. Farmers tend crops that may eventually become bread at Giza. Herds move under supervision, supplying animals for meat, leather, traction, ceremony, and status. Expeditions travel toward quarries, mines, forests, and ports, because Egypt itself does not possess every resource the project requires. Timber must arrive from farther away. Copper comes through, demanding networks of extraction and transport. Fine stone may travel hundreds of kilometers. The monument concentrates distant landscapes into one place. Red granite from Aswan, limestone from Tura, local rock from Giza, wood from beyond Egypt, and provisions from estates throughout the Nile Valley all converge beneath Khufu's horizon. By full morning, the pyramid no longer looks like an isolated wonder. It looks like the visible summit of an entire society. Its mass rests not only upon bedrock but upon harvests, taxes, boats, beliefs, offices, and obligations distributed across the kingdom. Yet this wider view creates a sharper question. A state may order a monument, and a religion may give it meaning, but neither cuts a block or pulls a rope. The real builders remain individual people, arranged into groups whose legal position, skill, status, and degree of freedom are more complicated than the old image of an enslaved multitude allows. Their identities wait in the smaller traces, where royal power breaks apart into names, crews, bones, and daily work. The names, crews, bones, and daily work do not reveal themselves in one dramatic discovery. They emerge slowly from places that earlier explorers often treated as secondary to the pyramid itself: a painted mark in a hidden chamber, a burial cut into the ground, a broken clay seal, a fish bone discarded after a meal, or a papyrus abandoned hundreds of kilometers away may appear insignificant beside millions of tons of limestone. Together, however, these traces overturn one of the most persistent images in popular history: an anonymous army of enslaved captives driven across the sand to satisfy a pharaoh's vanity. The actual workforce is harder to describe in a single phrase, but it is also more recognizably human. It contains hierarchy, obligation, skill, privilege, hardship, and many degrees of dependence. Inside spaces above the king's chamber, construction marks preserve the names of organized work groups associated with Khufu. These were not formal inscriptions intended for visitors. They were practical marks left during construction, hidden when the surrounding masonry was completed. Some include Khufu's royal name, helping connect the pyramid directly with his reign, while crew names suggest collective identities built around loyalty to the king. Such groups were not random crowds gathered each morning. Egyptian labor could be arranged into large crews, subdivisions, and rotating teams, allowing supervisors to assign tasks and compare performance. The exact structure may have changed by place and period, and scholars still debate how consistently later administrative terms can be projected back onto Khufu's project. Yet the marks make one point difficult to escape. The builders understood themselves as members of named, organized units. That organization does not by itself establish whether every individual came willingly. Royal service in the Old Kingdom could include obligations imposed through households, estates, or local authorities. A farmer summoned for a period of state labor may not fit the modern legal definition of a slave, but neither should he automatically be imagined as a freely contracted employee choosing among employers. Ancient Egyptian society contains many forms of dependence, and the vocabulary preserved from later periods cannot always be applied neatly to the Fourth Dynasty. Some people may have been bound to institutions or elite households, others likely served through labour levies. Skilled personnel could hold recognised positions and receive sustained support. The evidence does not permit one legal label to cover them all. What it does permit is a rejection of the idea that the entire project depended upon a vast population of foreign chattel slaves. No contemporary Egyptian record describes such an army building Khufu's pyramid. The biblical story of Hebrew bondage belongs to a different literary and historical context, and does not identify the Hebrews as the pyramid builders. The account of Herodotus, written more than 2,000 years after Khufu, describes enormous labour forces and a despotic king. But it is not an eyewitness report from the Old Kingdom. It preserves later traditions filtered through the interests and assumptions of its own age. Modern archaeology has moved closer to the builders themselves, and the picture it finds is one of a state-supported Egyptian labour system rather than a single captive population. South of the main pyramid complexes, excavation has uncovered the settlement known as Hayt el Ghurab. Its galleries, houses, administrative buildings, workshops, animal remains, bakeries, and storage spaces reveal a community designed to sustain concentrated labour near the plateau. Its most securely identified occupation is mainly associated with the later projects of Khafra and Menkaure, so it cannot be treated as a perfectly preserved dormitory from Khufu's exact building years. Beneath and around it, however, there are indications of earlier activity that may reach back into Khufu's reign. More importantly, the settlement demonstrates the kind of logistical world royal pyramid building eventually created at Giza, not a temporary camp of chained bodies, but a structured landscape containing different groups with different diets, accommodations, responsibilities, and access to resources. Some residents appear to have lived in long gallery-like buildings that could house organised groups. Others occupied more substantial residences associated with officials or administrators. Food remains vary across areas, suggesting that status shaped consumption. Large quantities of animal bone point to organised meat provisioning, though not to equal portions for everyone. Bakeries and food processing zones show the labour behind feeding labour. A workforce does not sustain itself merely because grain exists somewhere in the kingdom. Animals must be raised, selected, moved, slaughtered, butchered, cooked, and distributed. Grain must be measured, ground, mixed, baked, brewed, stored, guarded, and recorded. The people supporting construction may have rivaled the stone crews in complexity, even if their work left less impressive monuments. The nearby cemetery adds another layer. Burials associated with workers and administrators include people whose bones show demanding physical lives. Fractures, strain, and degenerative changes testify to risk and repeated effort. Some injuries healed, suggesting survival long enough for bones to mend and implying access to care, rest, food, or community support. This evidence is sometimes used as simple proof that the builders were free because enslaved workers would supposedly never receive treatment or proper burial. The conclusion goes too far. Dependent and unfree people in many societies have been fed, treated, and buried, especially when their labour carried value. What the cemetery truly shows is more subtle. At least some workers belong to an organised community that invested resources in their survival and recognised them in death. The papyri from Wadi el-Jarf sharpen this view. Merah, an inspector leading a crew, records journeys transporting fine limestone from Tura toward Akhet Khufu. His men operate boats, navigate waterways, load and unload cargo, and follow a disciplined schedule under higher authority. Other documents record grain, bread, beer, dried fish, tools, ointment, honey, dates, and supplies connected with specialized teams. These records do not describe every laborer at Giza, and it would be misleading to turn elite or specialist provisions into a universal menu. Still, they reveal literate management and workers whose movements are tracked through time rather than an uncontrolled mass pushed toward the pyramid. Even broken ceilings preserve unexpected human variety. Titles and names point towards scribes, priests, administrators, judges, and occupations as specific as hairdressers. Their presence reminds us that a royal building settlement requires grooming, dispute resolution, ritual, accounting, storage control, and social order as well as stonework. Someone must determine whether a delivery is complete. Someone must inspect a container before it is sealed. Someone must decide who receives a replacement tool and whose ration has already been recorded. The smallest official act can determine whether a crew eats, waits, or works. Workforce estimates remain uncertain. The figure of 100,000 workers repeated from ancient literary tradition is not securely supported by the archaeological footprint. Modern reconstructions often propose much smaller numbers, but totals vary according to assumptions about construction time, block size, quarrying rates, seasonal participation, transport, and the number of support personnel included. No single calculation fully accounts for a project that changes over decades. The workforce may expand or contract as different phases demand quarrymen, haulers, masons, boat crews, surveyors, and finishing specialists. There is no reason to imagine the same number of people performing the same task every day from foundation to summit. The pyramid builders therefore refuse to remain inside one convenient category. They are not a mysterious vanished race, for their tools, language, institutions, and settlements belong unmistakably to ancient Egypt. They are not a faceless slave army, though some certainly experience coercion and restricted choice. They are crews with identities, specialists with knowledge, obligated labourers drawn into royal service, officials guarding supplies, and food producers sustaining everyone else. Their world contains pride and pressure in equal measure. As the morning advances, these distinctions become visible not in theory, but in the settlement itself, where one person wakes near a storeroom, another leaves a crowded gallery, and another steps from a larger house to begin supervising the lives already moving through Giza's streets. From the larger residences, the long galleries, and the spaces between them, the settlement releases its occupants into the morning. Doors open onto narrow routes already busy with people carrying jars, baskets, tools, and bundles of fuel. The architecture directs movement before any overseer speaks. Walls divide sleeping areas from administrative compounds. Streets channel groups toward gates, workshops, and the plateau. Storage rooms regulate access to food and equipment. A person's place in this arrangement is not accidental. Where someone sleeps, how much space surrounds him, what objects remain close at hand, and which entrance he is permitted to use, all reflect a social order built into mud brick. The settlement known as Hayt el Ghurab lies south of the main pyramid field, close to the massive stone barrier called the Wall of the Crow. Its excavated remains preserve a planned community rather than a loose scattering of huts. Archaeologists have identified long gallery buildings, streets, houses, food production areas, workshops, storage facilities, administrative spaces, and zones associated with officials. The most securely dated remains largely reflect the building eras of Khafra and Menkaure, with earlier activity possibly extending into Khufu's time. It would therefore be misleading to claim that every wall visible to archaeology stood exactly as it does in this reconstructed morning. Yet these remains provide the richest material evidence for how Giza's royal workforce could be housed and managed, and they reveal patterns likely rooted in the needs created when the first Great Pyramid began transforming the plateau. Inside a gallery, the air after a night of shared occupancy is close and stale. Sleeping arrangements may rely on mats, low platforms, folded cloth, or whatever personal bedding a worker can keep in limited space. The evidence does not preserve a neat bed for every individual, and the precise capacity of the galleries remains debated. Their long repeated layout has encouraged interpretation as barracks for organised crews, perhaps rotating personnel brought in for royal work. Yet they are not empty dormitories. Finds associated with daily activity suggest that people eat, repair equipment, store belongings, and pass time within or near them. A chipped vessel, a worn grinding stone, a gaming piece, a bead, or a small tool interrupts the institutional design with evidence of individual habit. Personal property is likely modest, but modest does not mean meaningless. A worker may possess a comb, a piece of jewellery, a simple container, a spare strip of linen, or a favoured game piece carried from home. Textiles require constant attention in a landscape of dust, sweat, and rough surfaces. Sandals wear through, linen tears, rope fibres loosen. A settlement supporting heavy labour must also support repair, and spindle whorls, needles, blades, polishers, and other small objects reveal work that rarely appears in heroic images of pyramid construction. Not every useful hand pulls stone. Some spin, weave, mend, grind, sharpen, shape, count, clean, carry, and cook. The contrast between long galleries and larger houses suggests that rank alters domestic life. An administrator or senior official may occupy rooms offering greater privacy, better storage, and closer access to controlled goods. His household can display more varied objects and perhaps receive different foods. In crowded accommodation, by contrast, privacy is fragile. A worker wakes beside the sounds and movements of companions. The group becomes a practical unit of survival. Belongings are watched, injuries noticed, tasks shared, and absences immediately visible. Communal life can provide solidarity, but it also allows supervision to extend into rest. When dozens of people sleep and rise together, it is difficult for one person to disappear unnoticed. Morning cleanliness is constrained by water, time, and rank. Giza is connected to a watery landscape below the plateau, but that does not mean every sleeping space has abundant water at hand. Jars must be filled and carried. Washing may be brief, and the same water supply must serve drinking, food preparation, craft activity, and ritual needs. Fine dust returns almost as soon as skin is cleaned. Hair can be cut short or groomed for comfort, hygiene, and identity. While the appearance of occupational titles connected with hairdressing among the sealing evidence offers a surprising reminder that even a building settlement maintains social expectations about the body. The workers are not stripped of culture when they enter the construction zone. They bring standards of appearance, protection, ritual purity, and dignity with them. Outside, domestic noise merges with institutional movement. Pottery vessels strike against one another. Grain grinding produces a low, repetitive scrape. Fuel snaps beneath ovens. Animals sound from nearby holding areas, and flies gather wherever food waste accumulates. Smoke hangs close to walls before the air warms enough to lift it. The settlement must manage enormous quantities of refuse ash, broken ceramics, animal bone, spoiled food, dung, worn tools, and debris from repairs. Archaeologists depend upon this discarded material because official records describe what the administration intends, while rubbish reveals what people actually consume and break. A royal inscription may celebrate cosmic order. A trash deposit shows which fish were eaten and which cooking pot failed. Organisation becomes most visible where movement narrows. At gates and intersections, crews can be assembled, counted, and directed. A missing person or delayed group affects more than one task because labour is interdependent. Haulers wait for ropes. Masons wait for dressed blocks. Boat crews wait for cargo. Bakers wait for grain. Scribes wait for supervisors to confirm a delivery. The settlement's planned streets reduce some confusion, but they also make control easier. Human traffic is arranged much as materials are arranged, moving from storage to distribution, from accommodation to work, from workshop to plateau. There is room within the system for informal exchange. A worker with extra fish may trade for oil, cloth, or a repaired sandal. Someone skilled with a blade may sharpen a companion's tool. Gaming provides brief competition during periods of rest. Religious practices enter through amulets, gestures, household devotions, and the official cult surrounding the royal project. The evidence remains incomplete, and the personal relationships of the residents are mostly lost. Archaeology can identify a cluster of objects but cannot always tell whether they belong to friends, relatives, crewmates, or strangers assigned the same room. Still, the settlement is not merely an industrial machine. It is a temporary or permanent home, depending on the person, and every institution within it must accommodate the fact that workers remain social beings. The social differences apparent in architecture also shape exposure to discomfort. An official can withdraw from noise and smoke more easily than a gallery resident. A skilled specialist may have better access to food, ointment, or replacement equipment. A rotating labourer newly arrived from a village may lack local connections and depend heavily on his crew. Someone familiar with Giza knows where shade lasts longest, which water carrier arrives reliably, and which supervisor notices small errors. Knowledge of the settlement becomes another form of advantage, invisible in titles but important to daily endurance. As the galleries empty, traces of the night remain behind impressions in mats, soot near lamps, a vessel left beside a wall, crumbs on a floor, a damaged sandal awaiting repair. The people moving toward the worksite carry the settlement with them through accent, crew loyalty, rank, and obligation. They do not emerge equal, though distant views of the pyramid reduce them to equally small figures. One has eaten enough, another has swallowed only beer and a hurried piece of bread. An official expects a later meal from a better store. A hauler already feels the familiar hollow pressure beneath his ribs. Before stone begins to move in earnest, the day's most basic calculation is already underway. How much strength can be drawn from the food available, and how long that strength must last beneath the sun? The hollow pressure beneath the ribs is answered first by grain. More than stone, grain is the material that keeps Giza moving. Emmer wheat and barley arrive as harvested crops, measured goods, tax revenue, stored reserves, and finally, meals. Their journey ends in hands made rough not by quarrying but by grinding, kneading, lifting, tending fires, and carrying heavy containers. The pyramid's most visible workers may stand on the plateau, but their strength is manufactured in kitchens where the air is thick with flour, smoke, ash, and heat. Grinding grain is slow, repetitive labour. Kernels are crushed between stones until they become flour coarse enough to retain fragments of husk, and sometimes mineral grit from the tools or surrounding environment. Egyptian teeth often show severe wear produced by an abrasive diet, though no single source of grit explains every case. A loaf may contain nourishment and discomfort together. Dough can be mixed in large vessels, shaped or poured into ceramic moulds, and baked in concentrated production areas. At Hayt el Ghurab, evidence for large-scale bread making includes ovens, ash deposits, grinding installations, and numerous bread moulds, offering a vivid picture of work conducted beside sustained fire. The heat bends posture and shortens patience. Smoke stings the eyes. Fine particles settle on damp skin. Before the sun makes the plateau unbearable, the bakery has already created its own private desert. Beer develops through a related world of grain, water, fermentation, vessels, and skilled judgment. Ancient Egyptian brewing methods are reconstructed from archaeological remains, images, later texts, experimental work, and residues. But the precise recipes used at Giza remain uncertain. Different batches may vary in thickness, strength, flavour, and nutritional value. This is not necessarily a clear, sparkling drink poured for pleasure at the end of the day. It can be cloudy, rich in suspended material, and tied directly to the ration system. Beer supplies calories and fluid, yet it should not be romanticized as the only safe alternative to water. Egyptians also drink water, and both water quality and beer production depend upon local conditions, storage, and handling. Together, bread and beer create a dependable base because grain is storable, measurable, and divisible. A bureaucracy can count sacks, jars, and loaves far more easily than it can count vague promises of nourishment. Rations turn food into administration. The amount assigned to a crew becomes evidence of work expected, status recognized, or supplies available. If a delivery is delayed, the problem travels quickly from storeroom to muscle. A hungry hauling team does not merely suffer privately, it slows the schedule. This makes feeding the workforce a central engineering requirement. The pyramid cannot rise faster than its provisions can be produced and distributed. The papyri from Wadi el Jarf reveal the variety available to some specialized teams near the end of Khufu's reign. Records include bread, grain, dried fish, several forms of beer, tools, ointments, and occasional goods such as honey and dates. These documents offer rare contact with daily provisioning, but they belong to particular crews and a particular administrative setting. They do not provide a universal menu for every person at Giza. Mera's transport team possesses valuable skills and performs work vital to the royal project. Its supplies may reflect that status. A newly arrived labourer assigned to routine hauling may receive something simpler, while an official dining in a larger residence may have access to greater quantity and variety. Fish provides an important bridge between the Nile and the worksite. It can be caught, processed, dried, transported, stored, and distributed with less expense than cattle. Bones and fishing-related objects reveal the practical importance of aquatic resources even when fish receive less attention than dramatic scenes of oxen and meat. Dried fish carries salt, smell, and concentrated flavour into an otherwise repetitive grain diet. On a morning when bread is hard or beer thin, a piece of fish may determine whether the meal feels sufficient. Yet fish supply also fluctuates with season, location, preservation, and institutional access. What reaches one crew may not reach another. Meat leaves a more imposing archaeological signature. Excavations at Giza have produced vast quantities of animal bone, including cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. These remains demonstrate organized provisioning on a large scale. They do not mean every builder eats beef each day. Cattle are expensive animals requiring land, fodder, water, herding, protection, transport, and skilled butchery. Supplying them to Giza draws on a wide rural network extending far beyond the plateau. Sheep and goats offer different balances of meat, milk, fibre, and mobility, while pigs can be raised closer to settlements under suitable conditions. The pattern of bones across residential areas suggests that access to animal protein may differ according to status and location. A cut of meat is therefore not only food, it is information, its species, age, anatomical part, and place of disposal can reveal how animals were selected and how portions moved through the settlement. Better cuts may reach officials or favoured groups. Less desirable portions can still provide fat, marrow, connective tissue, and flavour when boiled or stewed. Bones may be split to reach what remains inside. Nothing about large-scale provisioning guarantees equality. Indeed, the ability to distribute different portions allows institutions to express hierarchy through the body. One person feels rank as authority. Another tastes it in the meal he does not receive. Plant remains add quieter details. Charred grains, seeds, chaff, and fragments preserved in archaeological deposits allow researchers to reconstruct crops, fuel, processing, and food differences across Giza. Dates, onions, legumes, fruits, and other plant foods may supplement staples, though survival in the archaeological record is uneven. Honey appears in written provisioning evidence connected with specialized groups, but it is too valuable to imagine flowing freely through every worker's bowl. Oils and ointments likewise serve nutrition, skin care, ritual, and protection, depending on type and context. In a climate of sun and dust, something applied to cracked skin can be nearly as welcome as something eaten. The morning meal is shaped by time as much as ingredients. A worker expected at a crew assembly cannot linger. Bread may be carried and eaten while moving. Beer or water is taken from a communal vessel. Portions may be distributed by group rather than individual preference. There is little reason to assume a standardized breakfast identical across the workforce. Some eat before leaving their accommodation. Others receive food through workplace distribution. Specialists on boats or at distant quarries must carry provisions suited to travel. Administrators may eat according to household routines. The evidence preserves systems more readily than moments, so the exact sequence remains incomplete. Yet the body responds with perfect clarity. Coarse bread fills the stomach but demands chewing. Beer brings calories but also weight in the belly. Salted fish sharpens thirst. Meat, when available, offers richness and a reminder that royal labour can bring rewards unavailable in an ordinary village meal. The ration may produce gratitude, resentment, competition, or simple relief. A person can be adequately provisioned over weeks and still feel hungry during a long shift. He can consume enough calories on paper and still face exhaustion if distribution comes late. Food spoils, illness interferes, or his task exceeds the assumptions of the scribe who calculated the allotment. By the time the crews reach their assigned places, the food has become invisible energy. Bread turns into hands tightening around rope. Beer becomes the weight of a shoulder set against a task. Fish and onions become attention held through repetitive motion. Behind each effort stand fields, herds, boats, bakeries, storehouses, and records. Hunger is not proof of mass starvation, but neither is organized provisioning proof of comfort. It remains a daily uncertainty contained within a larger system whether what was eaten will be enough for what the sun is about to demand. Already the limestone is brightening, shadows contract against walls. The first jars of water are lighter than they were at dawn, and the plateau begins to burn. The change arrives gradually enough to seem harmless. Cool air disappears from the spaces between buildings. The eastern faces of walls brighten. Then the ground itself begins returning heat through the soles of sandals and bare feet. Shadows that offered room to stand at sunrise draw inward until they cling tightly to stone. On the open plateau there are few places to escape the light, and the unfinished pyramid reflects it in broad pale surfaces. The heat is no longer only something felt on the skin. It enters through breath, glare, dust, and the steady loss of water from a body already working. Giza in Khufu's reign is not the empty sandscape familiar from many modern photographs. Waterways approach the plateau, vegetation grows across parts of the floodplain, and boats move through a landscape tied closely to the Nile. Even so, the construction ground sits high and exposed, its local quarries cut into bedrock, its working roads cross open surfaces, and its pale limestone receives direct sun for much of the day. Climate conditions during the Old Kingdom are not identical to those of the present, and local seasons matter, but this remains an arid environment where heat and water shape every decision. The pyramid may be designed for eternity. The people building it must survive 1 hour at a time. Clothing offers limited protection. Linen is the dominant textile, valued because it can be woven into light garments suited to the climate. A labourer may wear a short kilt or loincloth that allows movement, with additional cloth used according to task, status, temperature, and personal means. Sandals can protect against sharp stone and heated ground, though many workers may go barefoot for comfort, grip, habit, or lack of suitable footwear. Artistic scenes often simplify dress for visual clarity and cannot be treated as photographs of every worksite. The exact clothing of one crew at Giza remains unknown. What survives suggest practicality garments must not catch beneath a sledge, restrict the legs, or become unbearable once soaked with sweat and limestone dust. Head coverings are similarly difficult to reconstruct in detail. Cloth can shield the scalp and neck, while hair worn short may reduce discomfort and make cleaning easier. Ointments listed among provisions for some specialized teams may serve several purposes, including skin care, grooming, ritual, or protection against dryness. There is no need to imagine elaborate solutions. A strip of linen around the forehead can keep sweat from the eyes. A shoulder covered during a pause receives a brief reprieve from direct sun. Workers learn through repetition which parts of the body burn first and which surfaces become too hot to touch comfortably. Water is the central defense, but it is heavy. Every jar carried upward adds labor before it relieves labor. Pottery vessels can be placed in shaded areas, and water stored in porous ceramic may cool slightly as moisture evaporates from the surface. The effect is simple and valuable, though it depends on airflow, humidity, vessel fabric, and access. A drink need not be cold to matter. It only needs to arrive before thirst becomes weakness. Water carriers, storage points, and distribution routines therefore belong to the hidden infrastructure of construction as surely as ramps and ropes. If the nearest jar is empty, the distance to the next one suddenly becomes part of the engineering problem. Thirst develops faster under strain. A worker pulling in rhythm loses water through sweat while his attention remains fixed on footing, rope tension, and the movement of the sledge. He may not notice the growing dryness of his mouth until the load stops. Salted or dried foods can intensify thirst, even as diet helps replace some of what the body loses. Without enough fluid, concentration narrows, muscles tire and cramp, judgment becomes less reliable. Dizziness on level ground is dangerous. Dizziness beside a loaded sledge, quarry edge, or rising course of masonry is more so. The surviving bones record injuries and hard lives, but they do not preserve a clear count of heat exhaustion. Archaeology cannot tell us how many workdays ended because someone became faint beneath the sun. The crews must adapt through experience. Heavy tasks are most tolerable earlier in the day, and work may be organized around changes in light and temperature, though no complete daily schedule survives from Khufu's construction site. Breaks may occur when loads are reset, tools sharpened, supplies moved, or supervisors reorganize teams. Some pauses are planned, others are forced by delay. Shade can be found beside walls, beneath temporary coverings, inside quarry cuts, or on the less exposed side of a structure. Even a narrow band of shadow is occupied quickly. A worker does not require comfort in the modern sense. He requires enough relief for breath to steady and hands to tighten again. Dust makes the heat feel heavier. Quarrying breaks limestone into chips and powder. Dressing blocks produces repeated clouds at close range. Hauling stirs loose material from roads and working surfaces. Wind lifts fine particles and carries them through clothing, hair, food, and water. Dust dries the throat, irritates eyes, and coats sweat until skin feels gritty. It collects where linen rubs against the waist and shoulders. In workshops, copper tools must be sharpened against abrasive stones, adding their own particles to the air. Sediment near the ancient harbour even preserves traces of intensified copper working during the Pyramid Age, a chemical shadow of countless tools being made, used, and renewed. Glare creates another strain. Pale limestone reflects sunlight upward, forcing the eyes to work against brightness from both sky and ground. A person may narrow his gaze, use a hand for shade, or orient himself toward darker surfaces when possible. Surveyors and masons responsible for alignment cannot simply look away. Accuracy depends upon seeing edges, lines, levels, and gaps that glare can flatten. Their work requires patience at precisely the time when heat reduces it. A poorly set block creates problems that may travel upward through later courses, so discomfort cannot be permitted to become carelessness, at least not without consequences. The seasons alter this experience. During cooler months, mornings may be sharply cold by comparison, and wind on the plateau can cut through light clothing. Hotter periods make exposed labour more demanding. The inundation changes water access, transport routes, humidity, agricultural obligations, and the number of people potentially available for state service. Scholars still debate how construction intensity shifted across the year. The project likely follows several overlapping calendars rather than one simple annual pattern. Quarrying, river transport, food production, specialist work, and rotating labour do not all rise and fall together. Heat also reinforces hierarchy. An administrator may spend part of the day inside a roofed room where mud brick softens the extremes. A scribe can position himself near shade, though his work may still take him outdoors. A quarryman cannot move the rock face into comfort. A hauler cannot ask the road to turn away from the sun, access to better water, more frequent pauses, Oil for cracked skin, or an assistant to carry supplies, mark status as clearly as a title. Yet seniority offers no complete escape. Supervisors must remain present, inspect progress, and answer when schedules fail. By late morning, every object seems changed by heat. Rope fibers feel rougher against wet palms. Wooden handles darken with use. Copper edges dull against stone and return to the workshop. Water jars empty, bread dries, and tempers shorten. The pyramid above remains serene, giving no sign that sunlight affects it at all. This contrast is part of its power. Stone appears indifferent to thirst, fatigue, and time, while those who shape it are governed by all three. At the edge of the quarry, a line has already been marked across the bedrock. Workers clear loose fragments from the cut and inspect the channels opened around a future block. The sun will continue rising whether they begin or wait. Tools are lifted, positions taken, and the first repeated blows travel through the stone. Heat defines the limits of the body, but limestone defines the work itself. Before any load can crawl toward the pyramid, rock must be separated from the plateau that has held it for millions of years. The first blows do not create a block, they create a boundary. Quarrymen strike along a line chosen according to the natural layers of the Giza bedrock, opening channels that separate one intended mass from the limestone around it. Stone does not emerge as a perfect white cube. It resists through fractures, harder patches, softer seams, and irregular bedding formed in an ancient marine environment long before Egypt or the Nile existed. The quarryman's skill lies partly in reading these differences. A poor choice wastes effort or produces a block that fails at the wrong moment. A good choice allows geology itself to become part of the plan. Much of the Great Pyramid's core stone comes from the plateau near the monument. This local supply is one of the practical reasons Giza can support construction on such a scale. Transporting every block from a distant quarry would multiply the difficulty beyond necessity. Instead, builders remove limestone from nearby extraction zones, leaving a transformed landscape whose missing volume becomes part of the pyramid above. The monument is not simply placed upon Giza in a physical sense. It is rearranged Giza bedrock cut out, moved a relatively short distance, and stacked into a new artificial horizon. Local limestone varies in quality. Some blocks are strong and regular, others contain fossils, cavities, or weaker material. The internal core does not require every surface to be finished with the precision visible in the finest casing. Blocks can differ considerably in size and shape, especially where they are hidden within the mass. This irregularity is not evidence of incompetence. It reflects an efficient hierarchy of stone. Fine material and careful finishing are reserved where alignment, visibility, structural need, or ritual importance demands them. Rougher local blocks can serve in interior courses, with smaller stones and bedding material helping manage gaps. The pyramid's apparent simplicity from a distance conceals constant decisions about where each grade of limestone belongs. The outer casing belongs to another level of ambition. Fine white limestone from the Tura quarries east of the Nile is cut, transported by boat, and delivered through the harbour and waterway system. When newly finished, this stone produces a smoother and brighter surface than the exposed core visible today. Mera's records place his crew within this transport chain near the end of Khufu's reign, moving Tura limestone toward Akhet Khufu. His diary captures the measured pace of journeys but falls silent at the point. Modern curiosity becomes most intense. It does not describe how the stone is raised or set. It proves the supply network without solving the entire building method. At the local quarry face, tools are basic but specialized. Stone pounders made from hard rock can batter and crush weaker material. Copper chisels and blades can cut and dress limestone, though copper dulls rapidly and must be renewed. Wooden mallets deliver controlled force. Levers help loosen, shift, and test heavy masses. Abrasive sand, harder stone, and persistent rubbing can accomplish work that metal alone cannot. The toolkit appears limited only when separated from the time, experience, and organization behind it. A copper chisel is not expected to remain sharp indefinitely. It moves through a cycle of use, collection, reshaping, sharpening, and return, supported by workshops whose activity leaves chemical traces in the ancient harbour sediments. Popular descriptions sometimes imagine workers drilling holes, inserting dry wooden wedges, and soaking them so expansion splits every block neatly from the bedrock. Variations of wedge splitting are plausible in ancient stoneworking, but the direct evidence for exactly how each type of block was detached at Khufu's quarry remains incomplete. Quarry channels, tool marks, natural bedding planes, and lever points provide stronger guidance than a single universal technique. Different conditions likely require different approaches. Builders do not need one secret method. They need a collection of reliable methods applied by people who know when each one will work. Once channels have been cut around the sides, the lower attachment remains the most difficult. Quarrymen must exploit bedding, fractures, undercutting, or leverage to separate the stone without destroying it. Recent mapping and three-dimensional recording around the Great Pyramid have drawn attention to sockets, grooves, and traces associated with levering and extraction. These marks are small compared with the blocks they helped move, but they preserve moments of concentrated force. A lever inserted into a prepared hollow multiplies human effort. Several levers used in sequence can make a mass shift by increments, almost too small to see. The block does not leap free. It begins to move because workers repeatedly deny it the chance to settle back. After separation, rough shaping reduces unnecessary weight. Every fragment removed in the quarry is a fragment that does not need to be hauled uphill. Masons examine the block for damage and establish surfaces suited to its intended destination. Red pigment or other marking materials can guide cutting and identification. While crew marks may help record responsibility or placement, not every mark survives, and not every surviving mark is fully understood. Some are practical lines. Others identify teams, orientations, or sequences. The evidence suggests a construction ground saturated with information, much of it written directly onto materials that will soon conceal it. The block must then be transferred onto a wooden sledge or comparable transport support. This is a dangerous stage because the stone is no longer held securely by the quarry. Levers raise one edge just enough for packing or timber to be inserted. The process repeats on another side. Workers control the movement with ropes and wedges, taking advantage of tiny changes in height. A block weighing several tons can be managed without being lifted bodily from the ground. It is tilted, supported, shifted, and persuaded. The distinction matters. Ancient builders rarely need to oppose the full weight all at once when geometry allows them to redirect it. Wood is precious in Egypt, especially large high-quality timber, so sledges and levers must be maintained rather than discarded casually. Friction wears runners, loads stress joints, rope fibers abrade against stone and wood. Carpenters inspect damage, replace components, and adapt equipment to different masses. The sledge itself may appear simple, but its proportions determine whether the load stays stable. A high, poorly balanced block can shift. A runner that catches on an uneven surface can twist the entire operation. Preparation of the route is therefore as important as the strength of the hauling crew. When the stone begins moving away from the quarry, the sound changes. Sharp blows give way to the creak of wood, the scrape of runners, short commands, and the synchronized strain of bodies leaning into rope. Loose debris must be cleared. The road may be compacted, leveled, reinforced, or treated to reduce resistance. Experiments and later Egyptian imagery suggest that moistening a prepared surface can lower friction under suitable conditions. But the precise use of water on every Giza route cannot be assumed. Too little may have limited effect. Too much can turn a surface unstable. Practical knowledge determines the difference. At the pyramid, the block enters another world of measurement. It must join a course whose overall geometry depends upon thousands of imperfect stones being managed within an exact design. Levers shift it laterally. Wooden or stone supports hold temporary positions. Masons check faces, edges, and levels. Mortar or bedding material fills irregularities and helps distribute contact. It is not a magical adhesive holding the pyramid together. The enormous stability comes primarily from mass, gravity, careful layout, and the way loads pass downward through the structure. Fine casing work demands closer fitting. Surfaces visible on the completed monument require a controlled plane across vast distances. Builders may leave some material for final dressing after placement, allowing neighbouring blocks to be worked into continuity. The sequence remains debated in detail, particularly as so much casing has disappeared. What survives shows that the Egyptians could achieve extraordinary accuracy while still using practical tolerances within the hidden core. Precision is concentrated where precision matters. One block now waits at the base, freed from the ground, shaped, hauled, and inspected. Behind it lies a scar in the quarry. Before it rises a slope of unfinished masonry. Human hands have solved the horizontal journey through repeated force and planning. The vertical journey is less forgiving. Somewhere ahead, roads must become inclines. Inclines must meet working levels, and ropes must pull against gravity without losing the load. The surviving evidence offers possibilities rather than one complete answer, and the missing connection between quarry and upper course remains the place where Giza's hardest engineering questions begin. At the foot of the incline, the block seems to recover all the weight that quarrymen and haulers have spent the morning trying to control. On level ground, momentum can be maintained once the sledge begins moving. On a rising surface, gravity takes back every careless gain. The crew gathers along the ropes, feet positioned for traction, bodies angled forward. Others stand near the load with levers, chocks, and spare rope. A supervisor watches not only the block but the people. The first pull must be coordinated. If part of the team strains before the rest, energy is wasted. If the sledge twists, one runner may bite into the surface. If the rope fails while the load is moving, everyone behind it must depend upon restraints placed before the attempt began. No complete ramp system survives around the Great Pyramid, and no contemporary building manual explains it. This absence has created space for ingenious models, confident claims, and occasional fantasy, yet the basic need is unavoidable. Stone must pass from lower ground to higher working levels through some combination of inclined surfaces, hauling, levering, and carefully controlled stages. The builders do not defeat gravity. They trade distance for manageable force, spreading the vertical rise across a longer route and dividing movement into increments that human teams can control. A straight ramp rising toward one face is the simplest model to imagine. It offers a direct route and allows many workers to pull in line. At lower levels, Such an approach could be practical, especially when the pyramid is broad and the required height modest. As construction rises, however, a single straight ramp would need to become extremely long or steep. Its volume could approach an enormous fraction of the monument itself, and maintaining it would require substantial material and labour. This does not make straight ramps impossible in every phase. It suggests that one fixed ramp is unlikely to explain the entire project from first course to summit. Other proposals place ramps in zigzags along a face, wrap them around the exterior, or combine several shorter inclines connected to different sides. These arrangements reduce the need for one vast embankment, but create new problems. Corners must be negotiated. Surveyors need access to pyramid edges to maintain alignment. A wrapping ramp can obstruct the very surfaces used to check geometry. Narrow routes limit the number of haulers who can work beside a load. Each model solves one difficulty by creating another, which is why scholars still debate the balance between them. An internal ramp hypothesis places part of the route within or immediately behind the growing outer structure. It is attractive because it reduces the visible mass of external construction material and could help explain how upper levels were reached. Yet the archaeological evidence has not confirmed a complete internal spiral route through the Great Pyramid. Voids identified by scanning technologies are real features, but they should not be casually transformed into proof of any preferred construction theory. A space detected inside the monument may serve structural, relieving, access, or unknown purposes. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every phase of raising stone. Recent computational proposals have explored systems of multiple ramps integrated along pyramid edges, testing whether logistics, structural limits, and construction time can fit within Khufu's reign. Such models are valuable because they force ideas to confront quantity slope, workforce, traffic, ramp material, block delivery rates, and interference between crews. A model estimating that construction is possible over a certain span does not demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians used that exact arrangement. It shows plausibility under chosen assumptions. Archaeology must still find traces consistent with the proposed system, and those traces may have been dismantled, reused, buried, eroded, or never preserved clearly enough to settle the question. Evidence from other Egyptian sites shows that ramps are not speculation in themselves. Ancient quarries and monuments preserve inclined roads, embankments, hauling surfaces, post holes, and related features. At Hatnub, a quarry system dating to Khufu's era includes a central ramp flanked by stairways and post holes, apparently allowing ropes and wooden posts to assist teams moving heavy stone up a steep incline. It is a remarkable demonstration of mechanical planning. But Hatnub is not Giza, and hauling alabaster from a quarry trench is not identical to raising limestone through the changing geometry of a pyramid. The discovery proves that sophisticated rope and ramp systems exist in Khufu's world. It does not reveal a complete blueprint for the Great Pyramid. Whatever the exact configuration, the surface beneath the sledge matters enormously. Loose sand consumes effort as runners sink and push material ahead of them. A prepared path spreads the load and reduces irregular resistance. Workers can compact earth, lay debris, add timber where practical, or use other materials to produce a more stable road. Moistening an appropriate surface may lower friction by binding loose grains, a principle supported by physical testing and later Egyptian imagery showing liquid poured before a large sledge. But water is not a magical lubricant. Its effect depends upon quantity and surface composition. A soaked earthen ramp can weaken. An overly dry one can crumble and dust. Someone must know how much is enough. Rope converts many bodies into one pulling system. Egyptian rope can be made from plant fibers twisted and combined into stronger lengths. The manufacturing skill behind it is easy to overlook because fiber rarely survives as impressively as stone. Yet rope quality determines the maximum strain a crew can risk. Thicker rope is not automatically better if it becomes too stiff or heavy to handle. Splices, knots, attachment points, and wear patterns all matter. The line must distribute force without cutting painfully into hands or failing against the sledge. Rope makers, inspectors, and repairers are therefore part of the lifting technology, even when they never approach the upper courses. Coordination supplies the force that tools cannot. A team pulling at random behaves like several smaller groups fighting one another. A team moving to a shared rhythm can concentrate effort at the instant static friction must be overcome. Cadence may be given through calls, gestures, or repeated timing familiar to the crew. Once the sledge moves, the objective changes from starting force to steady control. Workers near the runners watch the path. Others manage chocks that can arrest backward motion during a pause. Lever crews stand ready where the grade changes or the load must be aligned. The risk is greatest during transitions. A sledge leaving level ground for a ramp can pitch or catch. A turn shifts weight toward one runner. A steeper section increases tension suddenly. The block may need to stop many times while surfaces are repaired, ropes repositioned, and exhausted haulers replaced. Progress is measured in short advances rather than one heroic pull. A large stone moving only a few meters can consume much of a working period, especially if preparation is included. Efficiency comes from repeating the same controlled sequence until it becomes ordinary. As the pyramid grows narrower, the problem changes. Fewer blocks are required for each course, but they must travel higher, and the working area becomes more restricted. The builders may alter ramp arrangements, employ more levering, or shift loads through shorter staged movements. Smaller teams of experienced personnel may become increasingly important. No reason exists to assume that the method used at the 20th course remains unchanged near the summit. Construction is a living process. Roads are extended, old routes buried, ramps dismantled, and techniques adjusted to the monument's changing shape. On this morning, the waiting block begins its ascent through a sequence whose exact architecture is lost. The crew leans forward, the ropes straighten, and the sledge refuses to move. Tension grows until resistance breaks almost imperceptibly. Wood scrapes over the prepared surface. A chock is lifted, then carried forward. The block advances the length of a hand, then another. Nothing about the movement resembles magic, and nothing about it is easy. Yet physical strength alone cannot maintain this rhythm across hundreds of loads, intersecting routes, and multiple work zones. Someone must decide which crew has priority, when a ramp is clear, where a block belongs, and whether the men pulling it are recorded as present. The incline carries stone upward, but orders keep stones from colliding. Above the scrape of the sledge and the strain of rope lies another structure just as essential as the ramp, a network of signals, measurements, lists, and authority directing the entire living worksite. The order does not reach the hauling crew as an abstract command from the pharaoh. It passes through layers. A senior official assigns responsibility to an administrator communicates with an overseer directs a crew leader, and the crew leader turns the requirement into bodies positioned along a rope. Between the palace and the sledge lie countless decisions too small for royal monuments to commemorate. Which ramp is open? Which block is ready? Which rope has been inspected? Which crew has received its ration? Which boat has arrived? And which tool must be replaced before work can continue? Authority becomes effective only when someone close to the ground translates it into the next practical action. The construction site must manage traffic as much as stone. Quarry routes, delivery roads, ramps, workshops, and working surfaces all intersect. A delayed sledge can obstruct another crew. Fine casing stone cannot be left where rough core blocks are expected. Timber, water, mortar, tools, and food need routes of their own. The narrowest points create the greatest pressure, particularly as the pyramid rises and the available working area contracts. A supervisor who allows too many loads onto one route does not increase productivity. He creates confusion, exhausted crews waiting in the sun, and a greater chance that one error will spread through the schedule. Signals help separate useful motion from noise. The exact commands used at Khufu's site are lost, and no surviving record preserves the complete vocabulary of hauling calls. Yet coordinated labour requires recognizable cues. A gesture can tell a lever team to stop. A repeated vocal rhythm can unite a pull. A signal from higher ground can indicate that a route is clear. Runners or messengers may carry information where distance, dust, and the shape of the monument block site. Experienced crews do not need every action explained. Repetition turns sequences into shared knowledge, allowing a small number of supervisors to direct many people without speaking individually to each worker. Crew organization divides the project into manageable human units. Names painted inside hidden construction spaces reveal groups that identify themselves through Khufu and their collective role. Larger bodies of labor may be subdivided into smaller teams, each responsible for a portion of the task. Such divisions create accountability. If a surface is poorly dressed or a delivery incomplete, an overseer can identify the group concerned. They may also create pride and competition. A named crew is more than a number. It possesses a reputation, internal hierarchy, and memory of past performance, even if most of its individual members vanish from history. The scribe gives this organization durability. He carries a palette, pigments, writing implements, and training unavailable to most people around him. Literacy in the Old Kingdom is specialized and closely connected with institutions. Writing allows deliveries to be compared with expectations, personnel to be associated with duties, and supplies to be tracked beyond the memory of one supervisor. Yet the scribe's work is not detached from physical reality. Dust affects the writing surface. Heat dries materials. A missing seal, damaged document, or ambiguous mark can create consequences for people waiting nearby. Bureaucracy at Giza is not performed in silent modern offices. It operates amid animals, boats, ovens, shouting, and stone. Mira's journal provides the clearest surviving glimpse of this mentality. His records organize work by days and movements, noting travel between Tura and the Giza region, activity at landing places, and the transport of limestone toward Akhet Khufu. The entries are brief because their purpose is practical, not literary. They do not describe sunsets, aching shoulders, or the appearance of the pyramid from the river. Their restraint is precisely what makes them powerful. They show that a crew's time is monitored through repeated journeys, and that transport belongs within a larger chain of authority. Mira works under senior administration connected directly with the royal project, demonstrating how even a boat journey exists inside an official schedule. Other papyri from Wadi al-Jarf preserve accounts of provisions, tools, and materials for specialized teams: bread, grain, dried fish, beer, honey, dates, ointment, and equipment appear as items to be allocated and checked. These lists do not reveal whether a recipient enjoys the meal or resents its size. They reveal something colder and more useful to the administration: quantities. The state cannot measure fatigue directly, but it can count rations. It cannot record every moment of effort, but it can record attendance, delivery, or output where documentation survives. Human need is translated into numbers that can travel upward through the system. Clay ceilings perform a related task without requiring a long text. Wet clay placed over a closure can receive an official impression, linking a container, door, bundle, or storeroom to recognized authority. When the sealed object is opened, the clay breaks. Thousands of fragments found in administrative context preserve pieces of this process. They are, in effect, fossils of permission. A broken ceiling may show that goods passed through a controlled boundary. Though reconstructing the exact action behind every fragment is difficult, titles impressed into clay reveal priests, scribes, administrators, judges, and other personnel inhabiting the institutional world around the pyramids. Measurement reaches from food to architecture. Grain is counted by volume, work is organized by time, stone is checked through length, level, angle, and alignment. Surveyors use cords, plumb devices, measuring rods, sighting, and water or other leveling techniques to establish relationships across the construction surface. The precise procedures used to orient and level every part of the Great Pyramid remain debated, but the result demonstrates extraordinary control. Such accuracy cannot be inspected only at the end. Errors must be detected while they are still small enough to correct. Quality control is therefore continuous. A block arriving at the wrong height, a face cut beyond its intended line, or a course drifting from level can affect the stones around it. Masons inspect contact surfaces. Surveyors compare positions. Supervisors decide whether a block can be adjusted, reassigned, or rejected. Waste is costly, but forcing unsuitable material into a critical position can be costlier. The project's speed depends partly upon the willingness to stop one task before it creates a larger failure. Modern calculations sometimes divide the pyramid's estimated number of blocks by a proposed construction period and announce that one stone must have been placed every few minutes. The arithmetic is dramatic but misleading when treated as a literal work rhythm. Many crews can operate simultaneously. Blocks vary in size. Quarrying, transport, placement, and finishing overlap. Lower courses require far more stones than upper ones, while specialized internal spaces demand slower and more complex work. Construction rates shift across seasons and phases. An average conceals the living pattern it claims to explain. The officials at Giza do not possess a modern master schedule printed across decades, but they understand sequence. Foundations must precede upper courses, chambers, passages, relieving spaces, and external faces require materials to arrive at particular stages. Granite from Aswan cannot appear late without delaying work designed around it. Tura limestone must be transported through waterways when conditions permit. Food must arrive continuously, regardless of which architectural phase is underway. The administration coordinates several clocks at once: the river's season, the agricultural year, crew rotations, quarry output, boat journeys, ration cycles, and the rising height of the monument. When the system works, its complexity disappears. A block arrives when a path is clear. A crew finds water where expected, A sharpened tool replaces a blunt one. A ceiling is broken, goods are counted, and another container is opened. The pyramid seems to rise through smooth inevitability. When the system fails, every dependency becomes visible. Haulers stand idle, food spoils, a boat waits for water, a supervisor searches for an absent crew. The monument's greatest vulnerability is not the weight of stone, but the interruption of flow. By midday, reports move down from the plateau and up from the harbour. A shipment has entered the basin. Fine limestone is ready to be unloaded. The information passes through officials before the stone itself moves another step. Far below the working courses, boatmen guide their vessel through brown water toward a landing crowded with ropes, poles, jars, and waiting hands. The pyramid's orders reach the river, and the river answers with nearly everything the monument cannot obtain from Giza alone. The boat enters the landing zone slowly because stone allows no careless arrival. A vessel carrying fine limestone has momentum even after its sail is lowered, and its crew begins controlling it with poles, ropes, and steering oars. Men on shore take lines and guide the hull toward a prepared edge. Mud pulls at their feet. Water strikes wood with a rhythm almost gentle enough to disguise the weight aboard. Above the landing, the pyramid is visible through dust and glare, but from here its construction begins to look less like a desert undertaking than a river operation. The modern Nile flows farther from the pyramid field, and the empty ground between river and plateau encourages the illusion that builders dragged distant stone across a broad, dry wilderness. Ancient Giza presents a different landscape. Branches of the Nile, flood basins, channels, harbour installations, and low-lying waterways bring transport much closer to the royal building ground. Geological cores, pollen, radar mapping, sediment analysis, and reconstructed topography have transformed the picture. Water is not a minor background feature. It is the logistical foundation that makes Giza practical. Recent research has traced a long-vanished Nile channel now called the Ahramat Branch, running near a chain of pyramid complexes along the western desert margin. Its former course helps explain why so many royal monuments stand where floodplain meets higher ground. At Giza, studies of local waterways and harbour environments indicate access through branches, sometimes discussed as the Khufu branch or related waterscape. Terminology and the exact configuration change across research models because river channels migrate, silt accumulates, and different phases of the system leave overlapping traces. What survives in the record suggests a dynamic landscape rather than one permanent canal frozen in place for centuries. Pollen recovered from sediments provides evidence that water levels near Giza remained sufficient during much of the Old Kingdom to support transport into the pyramid zone. Plants associated with wet conditions leave microscopic traces long after visible channels disappear. Together with geological data, they reveal a river environment reaching toward the plateau during the main age of construction. This does not mean boats can sail directly to any point at any time. Water depth changes seasonally. Channels require maintenance. Basins silt up. Floods alter banks and routes. The harbour is useful precisely because people adapt natural water to administrative purpose. The annual inundation expands navigable space but introduces uncertainty. A strong flood can carry boats and replenish basins, yet excessive water damages settlements and fields. A weak flood restricts access and threatens harvests that feed the workforce. Builders must work with levels they cannot command. Embankments, channels, landing places, and basins can guide water, but they cannot create a successful inundation. The pyramid depends upon a river whose behavior is regular enough to plan around and variable enough to resist complete control. For heavy materials, water changes the arithmetic of distance. A block resting on a boat can travel farther with less human effort than the same block hauled overland. The challenge shifts from continuous friction against ground to vessel capacity, balance, navigation, and unloading. Stone must be positioned so the hull remains stable. Cargo cannot roll when the boat turns or meets current. The crew watches water depth because a grounded vessel carrying several tons cannot simply be pushed free. The river reduces one difficulty by replacing it with another set of specialized risks. Tura limestone crosses from quarries on the eastern side of the Nile system toward Giza. Quarrymen cut the fine stone underground or along quarry faces, transport it to a landing, and load it under supervision. Mera's journal records repeated journeys connected with this operation late in Khufu's reign. His team travels between Tura and Akhet Khufu, spending days in movement, loading, and administrative pauses. The record's repetitive structure reveals the project's true strength. Monumental construction is not sustained by one astonishing voyage. It is sustained by the same route completed again and again until thousands of deliveries become a casing. Farther south, Aswan supplies granite for critical internal spaces. The distance is enormous by land but belongs to a continuous river corridor. Boats can move north with the current, while prevailing winds often assist travel south under sail, giving Nile navigation a useful natural balance. Conditions are never perfectly cooperative, and towing, poling, waiting, or coordinated movement from shore may become necessary. Granite blocks demand especially strong vessels and careful handling. Their arrival at Giza represents the convergence of quarry expertise, shipbuilding, river knowledge, and scheduling across much of Egypt's length. Wood itself comes through long networks. Egypt possesses useful native timber, but large, straight beams of high quality are limited. Imported wood from the eastern Mediterranean, including cedar associated with Lebanon, serves ships and elite construction where suitable. A boat delivering stone therefore embodies resources gathered beyond the Nile Valley. Copper adds another geography. Ore and metal move through expeditions linked to Sinai and the Red Sea. The harbour at Wadi el-Jarf, where Mera's papyri were found, belongs to this wider system of royal journeys, supply, and maritime organisation. Giza gathers landscapes together because Khufu's administration can connect them by water and record. The harbour is not only a place of arrival, it is an industrial and administrative zone. Stone is unloaded, tools handled, cargo inspected, and crews assigned. Sediments from the ancient harbour preserve elevated traces of copper contamination associated with intensified metalworking around the Pyramid Age. These chemical residues do not prove that every person is exposed equally, or that the harbour is a vast smelting centre. They provide a subtle environmental record of tools being manufactured, used, sharpened, and maintained near the water. Long after ropes rot and workshops disappear, metal particles remain in mud. Unloading requires as much planning as loading. A stable ramp, quay, or prepared shore must connect the vessel to land. Water level determines the angle. Ropes restrain the cargo while levers and supports shift it gradually. The boat reacts to every movement when weight leaves one side. The hull rises. When a block reaches the edge, balance changes sharply. Shore crews and boat crews must behave as one team. A misunderstanding can damage cargo, equipment, or bodies before the stone has travelled a single metre uphill. Around them, the harbour carries ordinary life, Fish are caught and processed, jars are filled, animals drink where access permits, mud is tracked into storage areas, insects gather near water and refuse, boatmen repair lines and hulls while officials count cargo. The smells of wet silt, fish, smoke, livestock, and human occupation are stronger here than the dry mineral scent of the plateau. Giza's two environments meet at the landing, the dark, cultivated world of the Nile and the pale stone world above. Causeways and prepared routes connect harbour zones with pyramid complexes, but their roles may include ritual, architectural, and logistical functions that change over time. It is easy to imagine every surviving causeway as a freight road during construction. Yet the evidence does not always support a single use in every phase. Temporary routes can disappear. Permanent monumental causeways may be modified or finished later. The working landscape is more flexible than the completed sacred landscape visible to archaeology. By afternoon, the water reflects a harsh white sky. A cargo unloaded in the morning begins its overland movement, while another vessel waits for space. The river carries away debris and brings in provisions, stone, timber, tools, and people. Without it, Giza would be isolated from the resources that give the pyramid its finest surfaces and most demanding internal elements. The Nile does not merely flow past Egyptian civilization. It serves as its moving road. Yet each transfer from water to land creates strain. A rope snaps tight, a foot slips in mud, a shoulder takes weight at the wrong angle. Boat crews face one pattern of injury, quarrymen another, and haulers another still. The system can calculate cargo and days, but the cost is ultimately recorded in human bodies, where years of repeated effort leave marks no scribe was asked to count. The body keeps an account even when the scribe does not. Repeated lifting alters joints. Long hours bent over grinding stones strain the back and shoulders. Hauling places pressure through feet, knees, hips, and spine. Quarrying sends shock through wrists and elbows with every blow. Boat work demands balance on unstable surfaces and strength applied through poles, ropes, and oars. Most of these costs do not stop work immediately. They accumulate quietly, becoming stiffness at dawn, pain during the first pull, and exhaustion that arrives earlier with each passing year. Human remains from cemeteries near Giza offer the most direct evidence for these lives, though they must be interpreted carefully. Burials associated with the workforce and its administrators include individuals showing fractures, degenerative joint changes, spinal stress, dental wear, and other signs of physically demanding conditions. Some bodies appear accustomed to heavy labour, others reflect varied roles, ages, diets, and social positions. A skeleton rarely names the exact task that produced a particular injury. Similar damage can result from farming, carrying, quarrying, hauling, accidents, or years of ordinary work. The bones reveal strain more reliably than occupation. Fractures are among the clearest traces. A broken arm, leg, rib, or other bone can preserve evidence of healing long after soft tissue has disappeared. Healing means that the injured person survived the initial event and lived for weeks, months, or years afterward. In some cases, bones set in reasonable alignment suggest stabilization and care. This does not prove the existence of a hospital beside the pyramid, nor does it show that every worker received equal treatment. It does indicate that at least some injured people were supported through periods when their capacity for heavy labor was reduced. That support requires resources. Someone brings food and water. Someone helps the injured person move or remain clean. A crew, household, or institution tolerates the absence of full productivity. Even a simple splint requires material and practical knowledge. Later Egyptian medical texts describe observation, bandaging, immobilization, and the assessment of injuries, preserving traditions that may have older roots. Yet these documents survive from later periods, and their procedures cannot be transferred automatically to every case at 4th Dynasty Giza. What the healed bones demonstrate is care in action, even when the precise method remains unknown. Care can be compassionate and practical at the same time. Skilled workers are valuable. Training a stone dresser, boatman, carpenter, or scribe takes time, so helping him recover protects an investment. Rotating labour groups also depend on internal solidarity. A crew functions better when its members trust that injury will not lead to immediate abandonment. Such support need not erase coercion or hierarchy. A state can treat workers because it values their labour. Companions can provide kindness within an unequal system. Human motives overlap as they do everywhere else at Giza. The cemetery itself challenges the idea of builders treated as disposable bodies without social identity. Tombs near the royal project vary in form and scale, reflecting status differences among labourers, overseers, and officials. Some burials receive more substantial architecture or grave attention than others. Proximity to the pyramids may carry prestige, connecting the dead with sacred royal ground. Yet it should not be assumed that every person who worked on Khufu's pyramid is buried there. Many rotating labourers may have returned home. Others may lie in undiscovered or poorly preserved graves. The excavated cemetery is a sample shaped by burial customs, later disturbance, and archaeological survival. Bones also preserve nutritional history. Severe physical work demands calories, protein, and recovery, but diets vary across the settlement. Dental wear reflects abrasive food. Episodes of physiological stress can sometimes leave traces in teeth or bone, though assigning them to one specific season at Giza is rarely possible. An individual may arrive at the plateau carrying the effects of earlier illness or scarcity. Another may benefit from steady rations during royal service. The workforce is not biologically uniform when it begins work, and the same task does not affect everybody equally. Daily injuries range from minor to disabling. Rope abrades skin, stone chips strike exposed limbs, copper edges slip, heavy loads strain muscles. A worker stepping backward during a coordinated pull may lose footing. Quarry floors contain uneven cuts and debris. Ramps narrow the margin for error because a moving sledge stores dangerous momentum. Boats add wet surfaces and shifting cargo. Fire, smoke, animals, sharp tools, and crowded work areas create hazards beyond the pyramid itself. Most incidents leave no skeletal signature. Bruises, cuts, burns, heat exhaustion, eye irritation, and soft tissue damage disappear from the archaeological record, even though they may be the most common discomforts. Experience reduces risk but never removes it. Veteran workers learn to recognize frayed rope, unstable packing, a block likely to fracture, or a surface about to give way. They position their feet differently and conserve strength during routine movement. New arrivals may possess great physical endurance from agricultural work yet lack the habits of a quarry or ramp. This makes supervision more than a tool of discipline. It is also a means of preventing one person's error from endangering an entire team. The body of an experienced labourer becomes a kind of unwritten manual. Calluses mark where tools are held. Posture adjusts to repeated loads. Muscles develop around familiar movements, while joints absorb their cost. Skill often appears as economy rather than strength, knowing when to pull, when to release, and how to use leverage before force. An exhausted expert may accomplish more safely than a fresh but inexperienced man. This helps explain why permanent specialists remain essential even if large rotating crews provide additional labour. Pain must be managed within the day. Rest, massage, oils, bandaging, and changes of duty are plausible responses, but direct evidence for individual treatment is limited. Ointments appear in provisioning records for some teams and may serve medical, protective, cosmetic, or ritual purposes. A worker with a damaged hand may be reassigned temporarily, though no surviving roster records such a decision at Khufu's pyramid. Others likely continue working because the injury seems minor, because supervision demands it, or because losing a ration or position carries its own danger. The physical record is sometimes recruited into a simple moral argument. Healed fractures and formal burials are presented as proof that the builders were respected free workers, while heavy skeletal stress is presented as proof of oppression. Neither conclusion is sufficient. Free people can labour under brutal conditions. Dependent people can receive food, treatment, and burial. Status can improve one aspect of life while obligation restricts another. The evidence does not support a single experience shared by everyone on the plateau. By afternoon, fatigue makes hierarchy visible in movement. A senior craftsman controls a delicate tool rather than hauling a sledge. A supervisor walks the route but does not take the rope. A water carrier bears a different repeated load. A baker's back aches from work performed far from the pyramid face. Each role marks the body in its own way, and each carries a different mixture of skill, risk, and recognition. One labourer flexes a stiff hand before gripping the rope again. Nearby, a mason favours one knee as he crosses uneven stone. Neither action interrupts the work long enough to enter an official account. The block moves, the course rises, and their discomfort disappears into the project. Yet in the cemetery, the body eventually speaks more honestly than the monument. It shows endurance, but endurance is not equality. Some lives are better fed, better housed, less exposed, and more carefully remembered than others, even when all stand beneath the same royal horizon. Seen from the edge of the floodplain, the workers on the plateau appear almost interchangeable. Distance reduces each person to a moving point beneath a structure too large for individuality. Up close, no two lives occupy the same Giza. One man pulls stone under direct sun. Another measures the line the stone must meet. A third records provisions in shade. A fourth repairs the rope that binds their tasks together. They all serve the royal project, but service does not create one social class. The pyramid workforce is a hierarchy of skills, obligations, privileges, and risks whose boundaries shift according to role and circumstance. At the top of the administrative world stand royal relatives and senior officials with titles connecting them to the king's works. Hemyunu, a powerful official and probable member of Khufu's family, is often described as the architect of the Great Pyramid because he bears high titles including responsibility for royal works. His mastaba lies near the pyramid, placing him firmly within its elite landscape. Yet no surviving text identifies him as the lone designer in the modern sense. A project of this complexity cannot be reduced to one inspired individual. Surveyors, master builders, quarry specialists, administrators, and experienced crews carry knowledge distributed across institutions. Hemyunu may represent the summit of authority without personally solving every technical problem. Senior officials live in a different material world from haulers. Their houses offer more space, storage, and privacy. Their food may include better cuts of meat, greater variety, and more reliable access to valued goods, fine linen, oils, furniture, personal ornaments, and servants or dependents can separate daily life even within the same construction settlement. An official still faces royal expectations and the danger of failure, but his exhaustion is not the exhaustion of a quarry worker. Responsibility presses through reputation and office, rather than through rope against the shoulder. Scribes occupy an unusual position. Their bodies may escape some of the heaviest hauling, yet their training gives them power over the people who perform it. A mark can confirm a ration, record an absence, acknowledge a delivery, or link a crew to a task. Literacy makes the scribe useful to officials and difficult to replace. It can also place him between competing demands. If an overseer expects progress that the crew cannot deliver, the record becomes politically sensitive. Numbers appear objective, but the person writing them still lives within hierarchy. A scribe may hold influence over labourers while remaining vulnerable to those above him. Skilled artisans form another layer. Stone dressers, carpenters, rope makers, metal workers, boat builders, masons, and surveyors possess knowledge developed through repetition and instruction. Their work cannot be expanded simply by gathering more untrained bodies. A novice with a copper chisel may damage a valuable casing block. An inexperienced carpenter can produce a joint that fails under load. A surveyor's error may spread across an entire course. Skill therefore brings bargaining value, better support, or steadier employment, though the evidence does not allow a universal rule for wages and status. Payment itself does not resemble a modern salary. Food, beer, grain, cloth, oil, housing, and institutional rations can compensate or sustain service. Access to a respected position may bring prestige and long-term connection to the royal administration. Some specialists may belong to permanent workforces attached to the crown or an estate. Others may move between projects, expeditions, quarries, and workshops as needed. Their identity is tied not only to what they own, but to whom they serve and which institution provides for them. Rotating labourers may experience Giza differently. They can arrive through obligations placed upon communities, households, or regional administrations. Their service may be temporary, ending after a scheduled period before they return to agricultural work elsewhere. Such a system allows the state to mobilize large numbers without permanently housing every participant. It also creates constant turnover. New groups need orientation, supervision, and integration into existing routines. They may bring local loyalties and accents to a worksite dominated by royal organization. The degree of choice involved remains difficult to determine. A person performing compulsory labor for a state is not necessarily enslaved as property, but neither is he fully free to refuse. Ancient categories of dependence do not align neatly with modern employment law. Some workers may be tied to estates. Some may receive valued rations and view royal service as an opportunity. Some may resent removal from home. Others may take pride in membership within a named crew. No single explanation fully accounts for these overlapping experiences. Crew identity can soften differences within a group while sharpening them against others. Men who pull together learn one another's strength and habits. They know who maintains rhythm, who wastes effort, and who notices danger early. A crew name associated with the king gives collective labour an official identity that may be used administratively and socially. Pride can arise from competence even under obligation. A worker does not need complete freedom to care about doing a task well, just as pride in workmanship does not prove that conditions are fair. Food reveals hierarchy in a form everyone understands. Animal remains distributed across the settlement suggest differences in meat access and portion quality. Specialists or favoured groups may receive more protein, while others depend more heavily on grain, beer, and fish. Honey, dates, ointments, and valued supplies recorded for particular teams show that provisioning can recognise function and rank. These goods are not merely luxuries. They communicate that one group's labour is considered especially important. Housing sends the same message at night. A large residence allows an official to store property and separate work from rest. A long gallery keeps a crew together and easier to manage. A temporary labourer may occupy space with little privacy, while a permanent specialist establishes stronger local connections. Architecture distributes comfort unevenly. It also distributes surveillance. The person with his own doorway controls more of his life than the person sleeping among many others in a regulated hall. Burial continues the hierarchy beyond death. Officials construct mastabas with inscriptions, titles, offering spaces, and durable claims to memory. Lower status workers receive simpler graves, though proximity to the royal complex may still carry meaning. The cemetery preserves recognition without equality. One person's name survives on a carved wall, another is identified only through bones and burial position. Many more disappear entirely because their graves were elsewhere destroyed or never marked in durable material. Status does not always correspond directly to danger. A skilled boatman may receive good provisions yet face drowning or crushing cargo. A quarry specialist may be valued precisely because he performs hazardous work. A baker may hold lower prestige while enduring smoke, heat, and relentless production. A scribe may avoid heavy loads but suffer eye strain, heat, and pressure from superiors. Privilege reduces some risks and creates others, though it rarely distributes them evenly. Movement between positions is possible in principle, especially through skill, patronage, institutional service, or scribal education. But evidence for individual careers among ordinary Giza workers is scarce. A labourer may become a crew leader through experience. An artisan may gain responsibility for others. A household connected to administration may improve its status across generations. Yet Old Kingdom society remains deeply hierarchical, and talent does not erase birth, family connection, or dependency. As afternoon shadows lengthen, these differences become visible in who leaves first, who remains to inspect work, and who carries equipment back toward the settlement. A supervisor checks progress while haulers loosen aching shoulders. Craftsmen secure tools whose copper is too valuable to abandon. Scribes gather records and seal what must remain controlled overnight. Rotating workers look toward crowded accommodation. Senior personnel return to larger rooms. The pyramid holds all their labour without preserving its inequalities on the finished face. A casing block placed by a privileged specialist rests beside core stone moved by men whose names are gone. From a distance, both contribute to one perfect slope. On the ground. However, the day ends differently for each person. The same sunset falls across better meals and thinner ones, private rooms and shared galleries, confidence and uncertainty. Work is beginning to slow, but the human world around it is preparing for another set of duties that starts when the ropes are finally laid down. The work does not end at one clear signal. It contracts. A hauling crew completes the movement already begun because a loaded sledge cannot always be left safely on an incline. Quarrymen stop opening new cuts but clear tools from the stone. Masons finish a contact surface before lowering their hands. Water carriers make one last circuit while supervisors inspect routes and decide what can remain in place until morning. Across the plateau, the noise loses layers. Repeated hammering becomes scattered blows, then silence. Commands grow less frequent. The wind, almost unnoticed through the day, begins to return. Tools must be accounted for because copper, wood, and worked stone represent valuable resources. Chisels are gathered for sharpening, mallets and levers are checked for damage. Rope is coiled away from surfaces that might cut or soak it. Sledges are secured, runners inspected, and loads blocked against movement. A misplaced tool in darkness can delay an entire crew at dawn. A poorly restrained stone can undo hours of labour. Ending work is therefore another organised phase, not simply the moment when exhausted people walk away. Scribes gather notes and close containers. Clay may be pressed over a closure and stamped with an official seal, creating a fragile barrier whose breakage will be obvious. Storehouse doors are checked. Remaining grain, beer, tools, or oil become tomorrow's starting conditions. A supervisor reports what has been completed, though the exact path of such reports at Khufu's Giza is lost. Some information may be written, some memorized, and some carried through personal inspection. The evidence preserves pieces of administration rather than one complete evening routine. The sun lowers toward the western desert, and the pyramid changes with it. The eastern face cools first, while the western side holds the last direct light. Long shadows extend from blocks, ramps, walls, and waiting equipment, making the worksite appear larger and emptier than it did at midday. Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, gains its name within a religious imagination where the horizon is a place of transformation. The setting sun travels toward the realm associated with death and renewal, while the royal monument stands ready to receive a king whose eternal existence depends upon cycles larger than any human lifetime. For the labourer descending from the plateau, this cosmic symbolism may coexist with simpler concerns. His mouth is dry. Dust has formed a pale layer across his skin. Linen rubs against places already irritated by sweat. His hands smell of rope, copper, wood, or stone according to the day's task. The evening meal matters more immediately than royal eternity. Yet familiarity does not make the pyramid ordinary. It dominates the return route, its growing mass measuring years of work and the power of the institution that has brought him here. Water used for washing must still be carried, and cleanliness varies with access, rank, and exhaustion. A brief rinse can remove dust from eyes and hands without restoring the body completely. Oils or ointments may soften cracked skin for those who possess them. Clothing is shaken, aired, mended, or set aside. Sandals are examined because a broken strap tomorrow can turn hot ground into misery. Small acts of repair occupy the hours after heavy labour, ensuring that a person and his equipment remain usable. Food production continues as other work slows. Ovens retain heat. Grinding stones may still move. Stews simmer in ceramic vessels, combining grain, legumes, vegetables, fish, or meat according to supply. Bread and beer return as the dependable foundation of the meal. But evening allows more time than the hurried preparation before dawn. Smoke carries through streets and courtyards. The smell of cooked food mixes with animals, refuse, sweat, and cooling mud brick. A settlement that appeared institutional in daylight becomes domestic through firelight. Distribution preserves the day's inequalities. An official may dine in a larger room from vessels holding more varied food. Skilled teams may receive provisions linked to their importance or assignment. Gallery residents share crowded space and communal servings. A thin meal after strenuous work creates resentment even when the overall ration system is functioning. A generous portion can produce relief, loyalty, or envy. Archaeological deposits reveal bones and plants, but rarely the emotions surrounding them. The same cut of meat can be ordinary to one household and memorable to another. Rest does not always mean sleep. Workers repair nets, rope, tools, clothing, and personal objects. Gaming pieces found at Giza show that structured play belongs within this working community. A board game can transform a small patch of floor into a contest of skill, luck, and reputation. Music and informal performance are possible, though direct evidence for a particular evening is absent. Stories, memories of home, complaints about supervisors, and news carried by arriving crews likely circulate wherever people gather, even if their exact words are unrecoverable. Religious life also enters the settlement at a human scale. The royal cult and the sacred purpose of the pyramid are only part of Egyptian belief. Individuals may carry amulets, make small offerings, invoke protective powers, remember ancestors, or perform gestures learned within their households. Evidence for private devotion in the Old Kingdom is less explicit than the grand ritual programs of kings and elites, so details must remain cautious. Still, no ancient community is spiritually defined only by its ruler. Fear of illness, hope for protection, gratitude for survival, and concern for the dead find forms outside monumental temples. The Western horizon gives these thoughts particular weight. Tombs surround the pyramid field. Elite mastabas stand in ordered rows, while workers' burials occupy their own places within the broader sacred landscape. The living eat and sleep near architecture intended for the dead. This proximity may feel less strange to Egyptians than it does to modern visitors, because funerary cult, memory, offerings, and continued existence connect tombs to ongoing social life. Death is not hidden beyond the settlement, it is organized beside it. Darkness arrives quickly after sunset. Lamps provide small islands of light using oil or fat and fiber wicks. But fuel has value. Most spaces remain dim. The sky above Giza becomes more crowded with stars as fires and lamps fade. The unfinished pyramid loses detail until it returns to the dark shape seen before dawn. Its alignment and upward form connect it visually with the sky, though specific astronomical interpretations must be separated from what can be demonstrated. The monument invites symbolism because it is designed within a cosmology, but not every modern pattern projected onto it belonged to its builders. Some work continues through the night. Guards watch controlled spaces. Bakers tend production that must be ready early. Animals require care. Boat crews may respond to water conditions or prepare for departure. Administrators may complete tasks by lamplight, although papyrus, fuel, and human attention all impose limits. The settlement never becomes perfectly silent because a system supplying thousands cannot pause in every part at once. Within a long gallery, bodies settle close together. Heat stored in the walls slowly releases. Dust remains in hair and bedding despite washing. A worker's muscles tighten as activity stops, and the small discomforts hidden during the day become noticeable. Tomorrow's hunger, heat, and labor are already implied by the tools placed nearby. Sleep is recovery, but it is also the narrow bridge between obligations. From the plateau, Giza appears peaceful at last. Moonlight touches pale stone. The harbour reflects scattered lamps, and the Nile landscape beyond is mostly darkness. Yet this quiet evening is partly a reconstruction. No preserved account follows one builder through supper, devotion, game, and sleep. Archaeology provides rooms, ash, bones, tools, ceilings, and fragments of daily objects. The rest must be inferred. As the settlement grows still, the limits of what can be known become as visible as the pyramid itself, a vast shape surrounded by missing details. Darkness conceals the worksite in much the same way time conceals the day itself. The pyramid survives because stone endures, but the routines that moved it were made mostly from perishable things: rope, timber, leather, linen, baskets, food, bodies, spoken instructions, and memory. These materials decay, burn, are reused, or disappear into soil. What remains is uneven. The most durable object is also the least talkative. A limestone block can preserve a tool mark for thousands of years without revealing who made it, how long the task took, or what the worker thought while making it. No complete construction archive for the Great Pyramid has been found. There is no surviving set of architectural drawings, workforce rosters, ramp plans, daily ration accounts, accident reports, or instructions covering the project from foundation to completion. Egyptian administration certainly produces records, but papyrus is fragile, and documents useful for a limited period are not necessarily stored for eternity. Archives can be cleared, destroyed, recycled, or lost when institutions change. The extraordinary survival of the Wadi el-Jarf papyri depends upon unusual circumstances in sealed storage galleries far from Giza. Their existence reminds us how much written material may once have existed and how little has escaped decay. Mira's journal is invaluable precisely because it is so rare. It places an organized transport crew within the final years of Khufu's reign and links Tura limestone to Akhet Khufu, yet it describes one portion of a much larger system. Mira does not explain quarrying across Giza, the design of ramps, the placement of internal granite, the organization of every labor group, or the experience of ordinary haulers. His record cannot be stretched until it becomes a diary for the entire pyramid. It illuminates one corridor of activity while leaving most rooms dark. The settlement evidence has similar limits. Het el Ghurab offers streets, galleries, houses, bakeries, workshops, administrative spaces, pottery, plant remains, animal bones, ceilings, and tools. It is the richest surviving window into the workforce community at Giza, but its clearest phases belong primarily to Khafra and Menkaure, with earlier occupation possibly connected to Khufu. Using it to reconstruct Khufu's exact settlement requires comparison and caution. Institutions can persist across reigns, but buildings, population, diet, and organization can change. A later arrangement may preserve traditions from an earlier project without reproducing them perfectly. The cemetery does not solve the problem of representation. People buried near the plateau may include permanent workers, specialists, administrators, and others linked to royal construction. Rotating labourers who return to distant communities may be absent. Poorly preserved graves and unexcavated areas distort the sample further. Skeletal stress can reveal demanding lives, but not always the specific task responsible. A healed fracture shows survival and care, yet rarely names the person who provided it. Bodies speak, but they speak through probabilities rather than biographies. Food remains are abundant and still incomplete. Animal bones show species, cuts, ages, and patterns of consumption. Botanical remains reveal crops, chaff, seeds, and fuel. Distribution across a settlement can suggest inequality. None of this produces a menu for one named worker on one date. Food moves between contexts. Refuse is swept, burned, dumped, and disturbed. A cluster of cattle bones may reflect a feast, an administrative kitchen, long-term accumulation, or several overlapping activities. Archaeologists compare deposits and patterns, but the final interpretation always depends upon context that may itself be damaged. The ramp question exposes the limits most dramatically. Ramps are made to be temporary. Their material may be removed, recycled, buried beneath later construction, or eroded. The completed pyramid conceals surfaces once accessible during building. Later quarrying strips casing and alters surrounding ground. Modern excavation reaches only what remains available. Not every place where a route could have existed. Straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, wrapping ramps, internal routes, edge-integrated systems, and combinations all attempt to solve real constraints. None has been confirmed as the single complete method from base to summit. This uncertainty does not mean that every proposal is equally credible. A theory must respect Egyptian tools, known construction practices, available materials, structural stability, workforce logistics, and archaeological traces. Claims involving vanished super technology, extraterrestrial intervention, or an unknown civilization do not gain strength merely because the exact ramp plan is missing. Gaps in evidence are not positive evidence for fantasy. The pyramid belongs within a visible Egyptian sequence extending from mastabas through Djoser and Sneferu to Khufu. Its quarry marks, royal names, surrounding tombs, papyri, settlements, tools, and religious context all anchor it firmly in the 4th dynasty. Workforce numbers remain uncertain for a different reason. Estimates depend upon assumptions about construction duration, average block size, simultaneous crews, seasonal labor, transport rates, support staff, and changes between phases. Counting only haulers produces one number, including quarrymen, boat crews, bakers, brewers, artisans, administrators, herders, and supply networks produces another. The workforce likely expands and contracts. Any single total can create false precision where the reality is dynamic. Even Khufu himself is difficult to recover as a personality. Later traditions portray him in different ways, sometimes as a harsh ruler, and sometimes within stories shaped long after his reign. Contemporary evidence reveals royal names, monuments, officials, and administration more clearly than private character. It is tempting to explain the pyramid through personal obsession, cruelty, or genius. But the monument grows from a system larger than one man. Khufu authorizes and embodies it. Generations of Egyptian development make it possible. The duration of construction is also reconstructed rather than documented in one decisive source. Khufu's reign provides a broad limit, and computational models test whether proposed methods can fit within it. Estimates commonly fall within a range of the decades, but the beginning and completion of different elements may not align neatly. Quarrying, causeway work, temples, chambers, casing, and surrounding complexes can overlap or continue in different sequences. The day the pyramid was built is therefore a useful imaginative doorway, not a literal historical date. There are thousands of building days, each unlike the others because the monument changes as it rises. Modern technology narrows some uncertainties while exposing new ones. 3-dimensional scanning records quarry surfaces, lever sockets, joints, and subtle deformations with extraordinary precision. Geophysical surveys reconstruct buried channels. Sediment chemistry identifies ancient metalworking. Muon imaging detects hidden voids. Botanical databases organize thousands of plant samples. None of these methods replaces excavation or interpretation. A scan reveals shape, not intention. A chemical signal reveals activity, not the name of the worker. A void can be measured without explaining why it exists. Archaeology advances by holding confidence and restraint together. Established evidence supports organized Egyptian labor, water transport, nearby quarrying, specialized crews, ration systems, and complex administration. Reasonable inference fills in the ordinary actions needed to connect those facts. Speculation begins when inference is presented without limits. A convincing day at Giza must therefore remain slightly transparent, allowing the viewer to see where surviving evidence ends and careful imagination begins. That boundary does not weaken the human story. It gives the story honesty. The builders are not less real because their conversations are lost. Hunger, heat, repetitive labor, social inequality, skilled coordination, and the need for rest follow from material conditions even when individual emotions cannot be recovered. The evidence cannot tell us which worker looked back at the pyramid before sleeping or whether he believed his name would last. It can tell us that many names did not. As night covers the settlement, the missing records seem almost limitless. No complete answer survives for the ramp, the workforce total, or the exact rhythm of one day. Yet absence is not emptiness. Enough remains to distinguish these people from slaves in a legend, machines in an engineering diagram, or faceless figures beneath a pharaoh. Their traces are partial, but partial traces can still lead toward a final recognition. The monument remembered the king by making nearly everyone else invisible. The monument remembers the king by making nearly everyone else invisible, yet their disappearance is not immediate. Morning returns to Giza, and the settlement wakes again. Ovens are opened, jars filled, tools distributed, and ropes uncoiled. The same routes carry feet toward quarry, harbour, ramp, and working face. One day becomes a season, then another year. Crews arrive and depart. Officials gain new titles or vanish from records. Experienced workers teach movements that no written manual preserves. The pyramid rises too slowly for those beneath it to see transformation in every hour, but quickly enough for a man returning after months away to notice that the summit has moved farther beyond reach. As the upper courses narrow, fewer stones complete each level, yet every delivery demands a longer ascent. Temporary roads change. Ramps are removed or rebuilt. Fine casing spreads across the exterior, hiding the rougher core and the construction marks within it. Masons finish joints that later observers will mistake for the work of impossible tools, because the years of practice behind them have vanished. Surveyors check lines whose accuracy will be measured thousands of years later. At some point, the last major stone is placed. Though no surviving account preserves the exact day or ceremony, completion is not one clean moment. Temples, causeways, casing, surrounding tombs, and administrative arrangements may reach finished form through overlapping sequences. The workers do not stand together to become a single historical memory. Rotating labourers return to villages and fields. Boat crews follow new assignments along the river or toward distant ports. Quarrymen move to other extraction sites. Bakers, brewers, herders, carpenters, and scribes remain where royal institutions continue to need them. Some specialists probably transfer to later projects at Giza, carrying knowledge into the reigns of Khafre and Menkora. Others grow old within the community created by construction. Their experience survives through technique rather than biography. This continuity helps explain why Giza becomes more than one pyramid. Khufu's successors add their own complexes, quarries, causeways, settlements, temples, and cemeteries to the plateau. The worker community evolves with them. Hayt el Ghurab preserves its clearest form during these later building periods, showing the mature logistical landscape that royal construction creates. What began around Khufu's horizon becomes a long-lived centre where administration, labour, worship, food production, and funerary ritual overlap. The Great Pyramid itself enters a new phase once building ends. It is intended as the central monument of Khufu's funerary complex, though the details of the king's burial and the original contents are largely lost. No intact royal funeral record survives, and Khufu's body has not been securely identified. Priests and personnel maintain the cult that supports his existence after death. Offerings, estates, and administrative duties continue to connect living people with the dead ruler. The completed pyramid is therefore not abandoned immediately into mystery. It belongs to an operating institution whose daily rituals matter as much as its architecture. Even within that institution, memory remains unequal. Khufu's names and titles are repeated. High officials preserve their identities in decorated tombs. Some crews leave collective names hidden inside the masonry. Most workers leave nothing legible. A person who spent years dressing stone may survive only through the surface he produced. A hauler may exist indirectly in the wear on a joint, the healed fracture of an unidentified skeleton, or the ration system required to sustain labour like his. The monument preserves effort while erasing ownership of that effort. Centuries pass, and Giza's landscape changes. Royal priorities shift. Administrative systems weaken or are reorganized. Cults continue, decline, and sometimes revive. Sand moves across abandoned areas. Mud brick walls collapse into low mounds. Harbour basins fill with sediment, and Nile channels migrate away from the plateau. The water road that once made the pyramids accessible disappears from ordinary sight. Later, Egyptians quarry valuable stone from older monuments. Earthquakes, weathering, reuse, and human extraction strip much of the Great Pyramid's fine casing, exposing the uneven core beneath the vanished surface. The pyramid survives these losses because its scale turns destruction into another slow process. Stone removed from it enters Cairo's later buildings and walls, carrying Khufu's monument into new histories. Visitors approach from worlds already ancient in their own time. Greek and Roman writers interpret what they see through stories gathered long after construction. Herodotus records a tradition of enormous labour forces and a harsh king, shaping an image that will outlive many more accurate details. Later travellers, scholars, rulers, treasure seekers, engineers, and tourists each create another Giza from the evidence available to them. The missing workforce becomes easy to replace with legend, enslaved multitudes, secret wisdom, lost technologies, and non-human builders offer simple explanations for a project whose genuine complexity is harder to narrate. A single mystery feels more satisfying than thousands of ordinary solutions repeated with discipline. Yet archaeology slowly returns the plateau to the Egyptians who built it. Quarry marks connect stone to crews, tombs reveal workers and officials, settlements expose bakeries, galleries, workshops, and administrative buildings. Animal bones reconstruct provisioning. Clay ceilings restore the presence of scribes and institutions. Sediments reveal harbours, waterways, pollen, and metalworking. Papyri give Mera and his crew back a portion of their time. These discoveries do not produce a romantic world of comfortable volunteers. Royal authority remains immense. Labour obligations can constrain choice. Hierarchy determines food, housing, risk, and remembrance. Bodies endure exhausting work, injury, heat, smoke, dust, and repetitive strain. But the evidence also refuses the opposite simplification of people treated only as disposable slaves. Skilled crews receive provisions, injuries heal, workers are buried near the monuments. Named teams take collective identity. The true story is not softer than the legend. It is more complicated, which is usually what happens when anonymous masses regain their humanity. The pyramid's deepest legacy may lie in this complexity. It demonstrates what an early state can accomplish when agriculture, taxation, belief, transportation, craft knowledge, and administration converge. It also demonstrates that monumental power is never abstract. Every state order must become a human action. Grain must be ground, a boat must be steered, a tool must be sharpened, a rope must be trusted, a block must be watched as it shifts the width of a hand. The pharaoh's horizon exists because thousands of people repeatedly solve small problems beneath a design too large for any one of them to complete alone. Some may have believed deeply in the sacred purpose of the project. Some may have valued reliable rations, status, or crew fellowship. Some may have resented the obligation that brought them to Giza. Most probably held several feelings at once. Pride does not cancel exhaustion. Provisioning does not cancel coercion. Hardship does not cancel skill. The evidence cannot tell us which emotion dominated one person's evening, and no single explanation fully accounts for everyone who passed through the construction ground. Imagine one of them returning years later, no longer assigned to the plateau. The local quarry has widened into a great cut. Familiar routes have been buried beneath masonry or removed with old ramps. The pyramid now rises nearly complete, its casing catching sunlight in a surface far brighter than the exposed structure known today. He can identify the general area where his crew once worked, but not the specific block his hands helped move. It has disappeared into the hole. That disappearance may feel like loss, achievement, or both. He leaves no inscription to resolve it. His name is not carved where visitors will see it. Time takes his clothing, bedding, voice, and face. It may take his grave as well. Yet the stone remains in position because he and others understood how to place it. Their knowledge is built into the monument even when their identities are not. This is the quiet contradiction at Giza. Ordinary lives become invisible precisely because their work succeeds so completely. The plateau seen today is not the landscape they knew. The river has withdrawn from the ancient harbour. The settlement lies in excavated foundations. The bakeries are cold. The quarry is silent. Casing that once turned the pyramid white is mostly gone, and the dark night sky now competes with the glow of a modern city. Still, the angles remain. At dawn, shadow withdraws from the eastern face much as it did during construction. At sunset, the western desert receives the monument again. Time has preserved the largest object and scattered the lives around it into fragments. A papyrus records a journey. A broken seal retains a title. A bone shows that an injury healed. A fish scale, grain husk, copper trace, or worn tool adds one more detail to a world no single discovery can restore. Human stories often survive this way, not as complete voices but as patterns waiting for attention. The people of Giza did not know that their rubbish would become evidence, or that their ordinary equipment would matter more to distant scholars than royal treasure. They acted within the scale of a day. They ate, worked, rested, repaired, worried, and began again. History later compresses those days into one phrase, the building of the Great Pyramid. But a monument is not built in a phrase, it is built in mornings. And so the view returns to the hour before sunrise, when the pyramid is a dark shape and the settlement has not fully awakened. An ember brightens in a bakery, water shifts inside a jar, a rope waits in a coil beside a sledge. Somewhere, an adult worker opens his eyes before the first call and feels the stiffness left by yesterday. He does not see himself as an archaeological subject. He does not know whether the king's monument will truly last forever. He knows only that food must be found, the air is still cool, and another block is waiting. Soon the eastern sky grows pale. The pyramid's edge separates from darkness. One doorway opens, then another, and the quiet ground begins filling with movement. Names disappear into crews, crews into institutions, and institutions into the immense stone horizon above them. Yet for one brief moment, before the noise begins, the monument and its makers share the same fragile light. The pyramid remains, the hands are gone. Between them lies the long silence of history, and within that silence, if attention is held gently enough, there is still the faint sound of rope tightening across wood as morning returns to Giza.